Hi everyone, Chelsea here. Welcome to the Collective Table's first ever virtual book club. As a reminder, each month TCT will host a virtual book club. We will ask everyone to read a particular book, and at the end of the month, we will have a question and answer session with the author via Zoom. This is a special Q&A because not only do we get to hear from Julie Rodgers, author of Outlove, a queer Christian survival story, but we also get to hear from Kristine Stolakis, director of the Netflix documentary Pray Away. Both of these extraordinary women vulnerably shared their experiences with the Pray Away the Gay movement and the ramifications it has on so many of our queer siblings. Julie and Kristine are honest, brave, and hopeful. We are so grateful for their leadership as we together work toward the kingdom that God intends for us, one in which every person is recognized and valued as a beloved child of God. We hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Welcome.
Happy Monday, everyone.
You too. It feels like a Monday to me. Some days I'm like, I don't know what day it is, but I'm like, it's a Monday for sure.
All days are the same ever since 2020. So,
Julie, where are you calling from? Where are you in the world?
I am in Brooklyn, New York with my two cats, Prince and Toby, running wild. They'll definitely wreak havoc at some point in this time, which is great.
Yeah. How cold is it there?
It is. So we got like maybe 10 inches of snow on Saturday. And it's somewhere around, I don't know. I always look at the feels like, and I think the feels like is like 20 something, but not bad.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
I think maybe a majority or at least half of us are calling from San Diego. So we won't tell you what our weather is.
Oh my God. Wow. I kind of like all the seasons though. Like I like bundling up and like drinking hot bevs and then I love summer and all the sun. I just love it all.
Yeah.
The thing is that we think that we can bundle up when it's 50 degrees.
Totally.
I genuinely wore shorts today. I had like wool socks on, two like layers of sweaters, a beanie, and shorts.
It's an interesting outfit.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, this is Kristine, by the way. Hi, Julie. Hello. I'm so sorry that I have to call in. As I told the moderators of the event, I actually just had a concussion of all things to happen before a busy work week with an amazing event scheduled like this. So anyway, I can't look at screens, but that's why I'm on the phone, but I'm really excited to be here.
Kristine, we're so excited. A number of us got together on Saturday and watched the documentary. So both you and Julie, we feel like we know you. I know you probably hear that, but like also reading the books. And so we're just so excited. I have like a list of questions from people that couldn't be here. So this is such an important conversation. So we're grateful that both of you are with us.
It's really great
pleasure.
to be here. Yeah. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you for watching and reading and just being interested in learning about these things. It means a lot. Just when people care, it means so much.
Well, people definitely care. And like I said, I do have a number of questions and there are people that showed up want to give space, but I know, Kristine, you might have to jump off. So maybe if we kind of ask your questions and then Julie, we can move to you, but also obviously feel free to jump in. But welcome to you both, Julie and Kristine. We're so grateful for the time and for sharing your lives with us and so much of the vulnerability and authenticity that comes across in Kristine, your storytelling, and Julie, you sharing about personal details of your life. They're really impactful. Moving to tears and different ways of thinking and challenging, especially in the church, some of our preconceived notions, some of our doctrine, some of our policies. And so it really is an important conversation and there's a lot of interest around this. So we'll just jump in. Maybe I'll open it to the people that are here. If there's any questions you all have, you can feel free to put them in the chat too, but I'll kind of be checking that, but I'll open it to the floor first if anybody has questions. it always takes the brave one to go first, you know? Kristine, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but one of the questions we got asked a lot was, why did you choose this topic to make a documentary about? What kind of drew you to this particular, this issue?
Yes, great question. So I came to this topic because my uncle went through conversion therapy when he came out as transgender as a child. He went to conversion therapy during a time when every therapist was a conversion therapist. So this is like in the 60s and early 70s, before psychological and psychiatric communities declassified being queer as a mental disorder. But that belief system that he could change, that he was mentally sick, unfortunately really continued in him into his adulthood. And he, following his time in talk therapy, and like the talk therapy style of conversion therapy, he just took the message that being gay also was a sin from his Catholic community. And that combination, and I say being gay, even though he was considered, even though I use the language of trans, he sort of went back and forth between calling himself having a gender problem and calling himself gay. I think that was the era where the language around this was just a little bit different. He didn't know how to categorize himself. So anyway, just to acknowledge that. But anyway, he believed his whole life that being, in his case, trans was a sickness and a sin. And I saw the impact on his mental health, and he suffered from mental health issues that I now know are very common for people that go through the conversion therapy world. He had depression, he had suicidal ideations, he struggled with alcohol and prescription drugs. He had obsessive compulsive disorder, and he had struggled with suicidality. So he really, really had a tough life. And what struck me was his continuous belief that it was his fault that he wasn't changing, and that he couldn't shake, in his words, his gender identity problem, etc. So I started doing research. He actually passed away a few weeks before I went to film school, and he passed away unexpectedly. And after his passing, I started doing research to try to understand this world that he'd been a part of. And I found this piece, and this is right before I went to film school. So, how to express myself through film was ripe in my brain. And I knew that I wanted to figure out a way to explore what had happened to him through film. And in my research, what I found was that the vast majority of people that run conversion therapy organizations are actually LGBTQ themselves, and that this is a movement that really is hurt people hurting other people, of internalized homophobia and transphobia wielded outwards. And understanding that piece of how this movement works, for me, really helped explain my uncle, because he believed his entire life that change was possible, even when his community actually became a lot more accepting. He just really drank this very dangerous Kool-Aid, and understanding that the people leading the movement were, described themselves as like patient zeros of change, that they claimed that change was possible. It like made me understand why he had chased this for his entire life. So that became the real thrust of the film, was exploring ideas of power and leadership in this world. And then we also weaved in a story of Julie, who's here with us today, who experienced the movement mostly from the point of view of participating in programs. So as the film does touch on, she was pushed into leadership for a brief period of time in the movement, but we wanted to center her story as well, to show the kind of complex result of this internalized homophobia and transphobia, is that LGBTQ people in this world are hurting other LGBTQ people, and her story is such, it's emblematic of that, sadly. So that's how I came to the topic, and a little bit about how that topic changed into a film.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about there's shame and guilt around being queer in the church, but then also about the ability to not change, like you can't change. So then there's this extra layer of guilt and shame, where it's like, why can't I do something about this? Like it's a choice you're making. So it's like kind of two levels of shame.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The layers of trauma in this world, I've explained them as like, in a hall of mirrors where you have two mirrors facing each other and there's just no end in sight. Because then there's also, Julie, Julie, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but then there's the shame that can happen after coming out of this world of having participated in it, be it as a participant, as a leader, however you experienced it. In progressive communities, like, how could you have been so stupid to have even tried that? So yeah, shame, guilt, that it's such a pervasive part, sadly, of this experience and world.
Yeah, Julie, I don't know if you have anything. Did you experience any of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to parse out like where different feelings of guilt and shame were coming from. I'm generally not a person who feels a ton of regret in life in general, just because for the most part, I think we're all doing the best we can with what we know at the time. And there, especially y'all having read my book, like, you just know there were so many different layers going on, and I was always just trying to survive. And so definitely, like, when I'm in front of people who have been deeply hurt by ex-gay teachings, and maybe saw something that like a talk I gave somewhere when I was like giving my ex-gay testimony and things like that, like I feel such grief that I was a part of that, and that yeah. And also, for the most part, I think I view it all so much as this larger system that's just completely toxic. Yeah. And we all have had like varying roles within these problematic systems. And for the most part, I don't deal with a whole lot of guilt and shame over having done it, so much as just feeling a sense of loss of like, I didn't have my 20s. Like, I lost my 20s. I lost my teenage years, and a sense of like, I guess I have felt some like frustration at ways in which I am so like late to learning things. And it's like so much like money you have to spend in therapy on doing things. And like, so much I'm like just catching up to, and I'm in my mid 30s. And so it's just more like, yeah, I guess grief is probably the word I feel. Like, I don't quite feel shame and guilt so much as just grief at the ways that like my own trauma has led to me hurting other people in a range of different ways over all these different years. And that's sad. And it's also something I can't dwell in for long, because there's a whole future that I can keep like growing and becoming healthier and like loving better.
Yeah. And Julie, you were so young when all of that kind of like grooming and like, I mean, I can't imagine being in a teenage years trying to figure your own self out, and then someone comes in really in a manipulative way, kind of taking advantage of that. And so it's just like, I think grief is a great word to describe that.
Yeah.
I also just want to acknowledge, I think what Julie just said is so giving, and Julie is such a giving person, that she would be thinking through and acknowledging other people's pain as she's talking about her own pain that we talk about in the film. I also just want to say Julie was also in one of the most ubiquitous conversion therapy programs for nearly a decade that continues today in Texas, called Living Hope. I think that you use the word grooming, and I absolutely agree that experience was one of grooming, and it was also one of abuse. I mean, Julie was abused for a really long time. And was in conversion therapy for a really long time. And I just have to like take a moment to acknowledge that for you, Julie. I mean, we spent a lot of time together, but I just think it's the most Julie thing in the world for you to acknowledge the pain of others. But I just want to acknowledge your pain too, in terms of what you went through, which is something that we really tried to capture in the film, and also really capture that this system of power that hurt Julie, that hurt so many other people. It continues today in the form of these local conversion therapy programs, often in churches, that look like what Julie went through, some combination of talk therapy, group therapy, maybe a Bible study that's meeting weekly to discuss homosexuality, but is really just a version of conversion therapy that is calling itself a Bible study, etc. These programs really continue today. And I just also, I guess, want to acknowledge that too, that Julie's story is not unique, sadly. And it's this larger system of homophobia and transphobia in mainstream religious culture, really, in the US and abroad, that continues these programs, these belief systems that fuel these programs. The new world of, like, I've been calling it like conversion therapy online, like just this kind of millennial driven, social media driven, share your testimony on your Instagrams thing that's happening, that is the same type of, as the conversion therapy movement continued in this sort of new form that is around, that's really around. So anyway, I just wanted to lift, to look at this from a bird's eye view for a second. I just wanted to say that, and then also, acknowledge, Julie, all that you went through, because you went through a lot.
I saw a couple of hand raised. Melody, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I have noticed, because I was brought up in that culture. We didn't call it conversion therapy, and I'm a cisgendered heterosexual person, brought up in that environment, though, where that message was happening. And so that felt like normal. And I have a couple of kids who are identifying in different ways that are not cisgendered or heterosexual, and their dad his first response was concern, because he's aware of the higher instances of self-harm and suicide in the LGBTQ population, but he's so separated from the cause of that higher instance of self-harm is the toxic message that that's not okay, as opposed to he's thinking it's a higher instance in that population because they're deluded into identifying that way. And so it's not so much a question as I feel like there's this twist that's happening, and it feels fuzzy, and it's partly because I grew up in that environment where it was considered sinful to not be straight and cisgendered, and that you can get out of that, and by, you're familiar with all of that, so I don't have to talk about that too much, but that just felt like what was right. And so my kid's dad is still in that mentality and that focus. And so hearing from our kids that they are identifying in different ways, then he's like worried about them, but he doesn't realize it's the mentality that he's still holding on to that is causing the potential harm. And he just doesn't have that awareness. Does that make sense? It's not exactly a question, it's kind of an observation of the twist there.
Yeah, and I would just wonder, like, I think I would want to know, like, what is it in particular that, like, I would ask him, like, what are you, what's making you uncomfortable here, or what are you feeling fearful of here, really? Because there are also so many LGBTQ people who are, like, very healthy and really well adjusted and, like, awesome parents, and making really cool movies or TV shows, or, like, there's just, like, all these people who are thriving, or ministers. And so I feel like my guess would be maybe there's something else going on with his fears too, because we can kind of, like, choose to zero in on different parts of a population we don't understand as well, and sort of blow that up to take up more space than necessary. And in general, if somebody's concerned about, like, mental health among queer people they know, then creating a caring and warm community for them is probably the best way to help care for their mental health. So Yeah, but chances are it's the keeping them from being queer is not gonna work out. That's not gonna be a possibility. So I hope he'll kind of expand his thinking and start and maybe listening to other people's stories of those who are thriving and what's really helped them thrive.
Yeah, I would hope that too. I think he sees the world pretty black and white, and it's pretty hard to communicate that it isn't the way that he was taught before. I see one of your kitties.
This is Toby. He likes to center himself in any Zoom interviews and calls.
Claire, did I see your hand up?
Yes, this is a question for Julie, specifically about your book. So very similar to Melody, I grew up in a very fundamentalist church, and I wouldn't be surprised if they had any kind of like private conversion therapy with some of my friends growing up, but nothing like formalized. But again, that message was out there. And now I'm a commissioned Methodist deacon and in ministry and in a very, very different place. But I struggle with a lot of resentment because I have since come out as, saying like, what happened in that church was not okay. And they know that. And I've had those conversations with them, and every single person that I grew up with in that church, especially if they're LGBTQ, like, or they're spending so much time in therapy getting over a lot of the things and abuses that happened in that church. And so I feel so convicted to speak up against that and make sure that, the people that are there now, that doesn't continue to happen. But something I struggle with is also, how do I have compassion in that as well? And something I thought you did so well in your book was you spoke truth, but you did it in such a compassionate way that as I was reading, I was like, wow, it doesn't feel like she's bashing these people. And so I was wondering if I hope this makes sense. And I was wondering if you could speak to how you like cultivated that compassion as you were telling your story. Cause I really admired that. And I would hope to be able to get to that place for myself one day.
That's really kind, first of all. Thank you. One of the things that I did throughout the writing process was really hold closely the fact that everybody I was writing about are actual human beings, like they're alive in the world, and they have been formed by all kinds of circumstances that I may or may not understand very well. And they're all complex people. And most people are genuinely doing the best they can. I think most people genuinely want to be good. And that doesn't mean that like, yeah. And obviously there's a lot of conversation around impact versus intent. But I just considered like, if Ricky was telling the story, how would he tell it? How did Ricky feel like he was showing up to me? How did my mom feel like she was showing up to me? And I know like most parents love their kids, and my mom loved me. And she did some things, both from a mix of like her own mental health issues and then the way leaders on the religious right had manipulated her into believing things that were untrue, like rejecting me was the most loving thing to do. So I was just trying to depict like what was really going on there. It wasn't just that my mom's a monster, and it's not just that Ricky's a monster. There's a lot of complicated layers going on, both at the individual level and at a sort of societal and political level. And so I just kind of kept doing that throughout each draft, and would have conversations with friends as I was writing and as they were reading and giving feedback, and working through, what is an appropriate level of like sharing about these people, and what's just working out my own stuff that I could like journal about instead. What actually benefits readers and moves this story forward. And so, yeah, really probably hundreds of hours working through all those kinds of questions, and got to the place where I felt like I included what I felt within myself needed to be included, and I could accept the consequences of even having gotten it wrong. And just like I say in the author's note, like, other people are going to have different perspectives, and like, that's welcome. Like, that will actually enhance the story, not challenge or diminish it. And at the end of the day, to be honest, having seen some reactions from people I wrote about, like Ricky, after the book came out, makes me think like I was too soft maybe on them. And I wonder now, if I were writing the book, if I was writing the book, knowing what I've kind of seen of them over the last 6 months as like a more fully formed adult than I was when I was like emotionally going through those periods, like, I wonder if I would have been much harder, and shared a lot that I withheld out of a sense of wanting to be compassionate. Doesn't feel like the right word, but just wanting to be respectful. So yeah, I mean, thank you. I don't really know. I don't remember what the initial question was, but those were some reflections I had as you were sharing. So thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Those were a bunch of questions we got for both Kristine and Julie. How did people in the documentary or in the book, have they reached out to you? Have they do you know where they are now? I think especially with the documentary, a lot of people were asking about Jeffrey McCall, who is the ex-trans person. They really wanted to know, have you talked to him? Where is he? What's he doing? Any info you have on him?
Yes, we've been in touch with him, and he, still considers himself to be ex-trans. He has seen the film, and he was very moved. He felt very moved by the fact that we really let him speak for himself and tell his own story, which I'm really proud of, and I'm proud of our filmmaking team that we were able to try to meet Jeffrey where he was at, while also through other people's stories give a lot of context to why someone might say that they've changed. And I don't think his point of view and his work goes uncriticized. And to Jeffrey's credit, he recognized that as well, that that the documentary does not shy away from the pain and the harm that this movement causes. He just doesn't see his work in that way still. And my hope for Jeffrey is that he someday understands that however he wants to identify, that really isn't so much the issue. It's pushing forth the message that to be trans or to be gay is a sickness and a sin, that is a harmful message. Just kind of, there's no way around it. It really is, even if you feel like you're doing the right thing. And that is such a common part of this world, is that people really believe, especially in the beginning, that they're doing the right thing as leaders. And I think that can blind people to the pain that they're causing, because they feel like their intent is good. And then when people in their world, or when news media, or when, their local LGBTQ community is giving strong, feedback messages, protests, et cetera, saying, hey, this is actually causing pain and harm and trauma, people are able to go into denial because they think they're doing the right thing. So, I hold both of those things to be true for Jeffrey. And I respect that he's someone that grew up in this culture, that he thinks he's doing the right thing, that he gets to be accepted by parts of his community that wouldn't accept him otherwise by calling him ex-trans, and he's still causing harm. So anyway, I think that I guess all those thoughts are to say that I'm in touch with Jeffrey. I think we're both clear-headed about where we both stand about his work, and I respect that he agreed to be in the documentary, and I appreciate that he watched the documentary with an open mind, and I actually really hope it just changes his mind long term. So yeah, that's the sum up of Jeffrey. But Freedom March is still unfortunately going strong.
Yeah, I think something you just said, Kristine, was I was going to one of those non-denominational churches, and in this sermon the pastor says, to love someone is to tell them they're wrong. And like, this is the message that is like, they really believe this is doing the right thing, you know, I mean, and there's a justice issue, you know, they think that they're helping. And I think like the statistics just speak to the opposite of that. And so
Absolutely.
And so I've appreciated you including those as well. But it's so indoctrinated into so many people.
Absolutely.
I'll just open it up. Does anybody have questions? Yeah. Sam.
Hi. I have a question for Julie, and I apologize. I haven't had a chance to read your book yet. So if you cover this in the book, and this is a repeat, I apologize. But I was just wondering what all of this, you know, how all of this has affected your own personal faith life, your relationship with God, your relationship with organized religion. If you could just speak about that, I was curious.
All of this being like that whole experience I had from like growing up until like kind of my time in conversion therapy, or you mean all of this, like the actual sharing of the book and film and talk I've done around, like interviews and stuff I've done around it?
I think probably the growing up and the sort of intertwinedness of your personal faith along with the professional side of going to events and speaking, and how you view organized religion as a whole. Have you found a new church life? Are you done with organized religion for the time being?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's going to be like a long evolving process for me throughout my life. I'm somebody who what I love about so many faith communities is that we are generally there. People are generally there because they're asking important questions about why we're here and what it means to love our neighbors and how we can grow and become like a little bit more kind and a little more loving and compassionate. And so, like, to the extent that any community, faith community, spiritual community is centered and rooted in that, I do find that like the most resonance there, and I want to be a part of that. The way that, you know, like big Christian stuff happens, like whether that's conferences or like, you know, the band playing, worship, or, you know, all that kind of stuff, for the most part, like I don't associate it as very life-giving, just because like too much of my experience with that was in contexts where I was just felt like tremendous shame and anguish. So, you know, I'm not, yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm giving myself like some space from like traditional, like what traditional church life looks like. But I'm still very involved in like communities like the Faith and Justice Network out of San Francisco. And, you know, people doing work around like anti-racism and decolonizing faith, and like asking questions about how we can grow and be a part of healing and justice. So it's a rambling answer to say I don't know where I'll be. I think my spiritual journey is going to be probably like look different in different times. And I've always loved that about like if you read about like Dorothy Day or what's his name, Thomas Merton, and you know, like these people who we look back on and know as like really like influential like monks or thinkers or writers, or they kind of like, if I love like reading their autobiographies of these like folks once they're old, and it's like they were going to become journalists for a little bit, and then they decided to go into the priesthood, and then they fell in love with somebody and had an affair, so couldn't be priests anymore, and decided to work on a farm, and through farming found their way back to this sort of sense of awe and mystery over the land and the process of growth and soil and what that means about being created beings in this beautiful world we're in. And so I just think like I kind of see my own spiritual life within like a little bit of a bigger context, and I don't know where it's going, but I know I feel sort of like a general sense of being held and like I like will continue to experience experience the beauty of spirituality wherever that goes.
Great, thank you.
I had a question about how those programs are funded. I'm not a member of a church, but they pool all the money together. Is there like a little division that possibly could go to those programs, or are you aware of it when it's happening, or is it kind of behind the scenes?
I can talk about that a little bit if that
Yeah,
works.
I was going to
Julie.
say, I think you did more research. Like I would just
Yeah.
have anecdotal.
Yeah. So in the time, so there was an era of the world of conversion therapy and the ex-LGBTQ movement. And I might, in the film, we just embrace that the popular way to describe what we're talking about is conversion therapy. It's it really is. We know that, like, I've seen different statistics between like 2/3 to 4/5 of what we know of as conversion therapy happens within religious institutions. And I note that to say it really might be more accurate to call this like the ex-LGBTQ movement, in which there are many different types of approaches for how one is taught you can change your sexuality or gender identity to cis and straight. So I guess I say all that to say, in the era where Exodus existed, there is like these large ministries. You've got Exodus International, Love in Action. There are a few other ones that were ministries, kind of have a nonprofit-y structure. There are donors, there's board of directors, and those bigger ministries aren't necessarily a part of a church, but are like fundraising via the ways in which ministries fundraise. And they were like umbrella ministries that housed a lot of local programs, and those larger ministries have more or less ended. I will say that some of the old guard of Exodus in the film acknowledges this, rebranded as a ministry called the Restored Hope Network. Exodus Global Alliance continues, which is Exodus Abroad. There's a few other, there's Courage, which is a Catholic one. So there's a few other big ministries, but largely the ex-LGBTQ movement now is one that is run more locally. And those types of programs exist in so many forms and fashions. Some are like ministries. I think that this I know a little bit less about, so I wouldn't want to be quoted on this, but my understanding is that Living Hope, I know that Living Hope continues to have a big fundraising dinner once a year. So I'm sure, Julie, you probably know more about this than me. I know they have like a world of individual funders and that they're also connected to a church. I couldn't tell you exactly like, the pots of money with which exactly are funding their work. But I do know that they do explicit fundraising, but that's a pretty big program. A lot of the smaller programs are just at churches. So I suspect that they would not be differentiating their budgets in terms of putting money specifically towards this work. And a lot of this is done by like pastors or youth leaders who don't see themselves as doing conversion therapy at all, but have the message ready to go that being LGBTQ is a sickness and a sin. And through culture and being inundated with how one might address this in ways that are based in disproven psychology and a really sad, harmful interpretation of like religion, are really hurting people, kids and adults, through teachings that they'd never call conversion therapy, and they'd never think of themselves as specializing in this work in any way. They're just doing their job as like a pastor. So it makes, that, knowing all that I know, one thing I decided in the film was like, the story here is not like, look at this messed up way in which this system is funded, because a lot of people are like mortgaging they so believe this is the right thing to do. They're like mortgaging their house or going into tons of debt, self-financing their own local ministry because they believe what they're doing is right. So I'm not suggesting your question was saying that there's something maniacal going on funding wise. I'm just saying what I learned in the research is like the funding is really local, specific to each program. hard to characterize quickly. And it's because it's done in this way that's just within the fabric of local communities and churches that can make it really hard to pinpoint. And that's why, like, when Exodus closed, a lot of writing was like, and now, the end of conversion therapy. Well, that's not true at all. Exodus closed, it was like a referral organization, but all these local programs and individuals and speakers, they really continue their work. So yeah, the funding is a complex part of this world. It is a part of this world. But yeah, not easy to quickly characterize.
That's what I was thinking just when you were saying, I mean, like, as a church, we fund different ministries, outreach ministries. And if you're taught that this is something that is beneficial to humans, or, the funding that can come from that, when people deeply believe it's the right thing, it will be there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Shannon, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's been any interest to like extend the conversation to like how, because I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I've learned that back in the day, like our diagnostical statistical manual of mental disorders considered gay issues as a pathology, and I just think it would be helpful to, I don't know, shine a light on that, and I don't know, extend the conversation, because I think psychology has done a lot of harm as well. So I don't know, just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I can say within my own family, the primary experience of my uncle, who just to say too, I mean, a lot of people have an experience with their uncle. They like see them once a year, but my uncle was my primary caretaker besides my parents. So I saw him every day and was really close with him for the most of my childhood. So anyway, he experienced conversion therapy with a licensed therapist. And some people do also, I will say, I was citing different statistics about where we know people experience this, but a very good chunk of people do experience this with licensed therapists to this day. So there's a story in what you're pointing out in terms of the history of being queer, being classified as a pathology of some sort. And there's a great documentary called Cured that's about that. That's about the declassification of being gay in the DSM. And that's being turned into there's a fiction adaptation coming out about that as well. The history actually has been covered in a few places. Another thing you could look at is when, oh my goodness, not the miseducation of Boy Erased. When Boy Erased came out, there was a accompanying podcast that's called Unerased. That's great. That does a really great dive into the history of the mental health community, really causing some harm in terms of the old and outdated ways in which people did pathologize being gay. So there's just some, and being trans and being queer more generally. So those are just some places that could be great to look. But in terms of what's happening today, I will also say, we mentioned this in our film briefly, but there is an organization that continues that's called the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice. It used to be called NARTH, and the National Association for the Research on Homosexuality. It was based in, I think, in Orange County. I know it was in Southern California for a long time, and it was led by Dr. Nicolosi, who was a licensed therapist, clinical therapist, who claimed that every disproven reason that someone is gay or queer in general was based in pathology in some way, and had all these kind of therapeutic approaches that got taught at Exodus conferences, and are really part of like the zeitgeist of the ex-LGBTQ movement more generally into today. That organization rebranded and is run by his son, and there are plenty of licensed therapists that still believe a lot of the stuff that we know is disproven, that I'm sure you know of in your own work. So yeah, I could have made 20 films about this whole movement. We ended up acknowledging NARTH in like a 3-minute segment in the film. I totally feel you in terms of just the harm that homophobia and transphobia wrapped in mental health language can do to a family, because I experienced it firsthand. It was I mean, my family still struggles with the idea of therapy and therapists being a safe place at all in any way, because it really, 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 really messed up my uncle. So, you know, that those are, you know, that's a different collection of thoughts, but I so hear you, and I agree that that's a part of this that needs to be talked about. I'll also say that for the film, we're working with a handful of national partners. So the National Center for Lesbian Rights, GLAAD, Trevor Project, and PFLAG. And they're all leaders in working to ban conversion therapy state by state and through different in different local governments as well. And those bans specifically are for people who are seeing licensed practitioners, so therapists who are practicing conversion therapy. They're largely banning this work with minors, and that work is a crucial part of ending conversion therapy more generally. And we also have to have a culture shift in our church communities, because conversion therapy also happens within religious organizations that are protected by religious freedom protections in this country, that makes those bans not touch where conversion therapy does happen the most. So we need to address it in our mental health community. We need the bans that protects a lot of people, and we need to have these conversations within our religious communities to make sure that people understand what they're doing is conversion therapy and that they have to stop it. So anyway, if you're interested also in this conversation as relates to licensed therapists, those national organizations, they're doing an incredible job leading on making sure that this thing really is banned in the United States in a really hardy state-by-state way.
That ties into the question that I had about how to change, and it seems like there's so many parts to that, how to make the change happen. So addressing people doing therapy, addressing the culture of the churches, addressing, you know, making the documentary so that people watch it and are considering other ideas. And Julie, you sharing your story is so powerful. I'm curious what you know, when you think about any large issues that have needed to change and have taken a long time to change, like, is it a heart to heart, one person at a time, gently, quietly? Is it like these big pushes? And you know, I think it's probably everything. I know a lot of people sometimes, or there are people historically we can look back on, like I'm thinking about with racial justice and Dr. Martin Luther King, and how he put his life on the line and he put everything on the line to really push that message forward. And then other ways that people are, you know, quietly doing small things. And what do you, either one of you, think are some of the most effective things that we can do that's within our power to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think first, oh, oh, wait, sorry, I heard somebody else.
Oh, that wasn't me, Julie. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, I think the first thing to do is say, like, where am I situated? What are my unique gifts and skill sets? And how can I make the biggest difference where I am? And then the second thing is not to judge and criticize people who are doing it differently, and to just understand the importance of all of us being involved in the work for liberation wherever we are. And so it was like Kristine was saying, like, we need people making this documentary. We need people making a documentary about, you know, more focus on how it's playing out with mental health professionals. We need people telling stories about what conversion therapy is looking like in spaces that are in more of like Black churches and Black communities. And we need to hear them from around the world. And so, like, we just need all these different things. We need to fight it on the political level and get it banned. And we also need to reach the moms of queer kids in churches who are going to be protected by religious freedom laws from whatever bans might be passed through legislation. So there's really not a right or wrong answer. I would just say, like, where are you and who do you know and where do you feel drawn and how are you connected? And then kind of look at what you have. Like, if you have money, then donating, you know, or if you're somebody who doesn't have much money, but you have a big heart, and, you know, yeah, I just think it's really all of it. And I don't really think we can prioritize I don't think we can prioritize what's the most important, because it all is going to be pretty central to be able to end the practice.
Absolutely. And just to add two small things, one thing I'd say is that with any issue that's as big as this, it can feel very paralyzing to know what to do. And I have found that like but even, I remember actually when I was first thinking of making this film, one of the most meaningful things that I did was talk to my mom about her experience with my uncle, her brother, who had just passed away. And it makes me emotional thinking about it. I haven't thought about that conversation in a while, but I was like, gosh, if I'm going to make this film and and this is like when I'm in film school, this is like an idea in my head. No one's in the film. I don't know anybody in the industry. I'm like, I know, like, I was not a part of the film industry in this moment. So the idea that it ended up on Netflix was that felt very out of reach. But I was like, in my wildest dreams, if this thing ends up in a place where people can see this, people are going to know that I was inspired to do this because of a family member. And it was something that was a really hard part of my mom's family, just because my uncle went through so much. And I had like a really moving, slow, long conversation with her about like, how do you feel about me potentially making this film where I'm going to end up talking about your brother, and what was it like growing up with him? And my mom remains religious and Christian, and goes to Bible study, and she lives in Dallas, and it's religion is a part of her life. So she was also processing it from a religious point of view. And we just sort of slowed down and talked about it. And of anything I've done, that may have been like the best thing I've done with the making of this film, was like that slow, intimate conversation. Those types of conversations are probably within your reach in a way that you just need to, take a breath and acknowledge that you have the power to have them. It might feel really overwhelming to think of a big change in your religious community, that you might have to feel pressure to spearhead loudly, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, just like I think there is a power in individual connection. But then the other thing I want to say is, if you're in the mood to poke at the beast a little bit more directly, I think there's also power in directly asking leadership in any religious community you're a part of, would you come out against conversion therapy and the ex-LGBTQ movement? And I can tell you, having asked religious leaders who consider themselves progressive to do that, you will be amazed at how uncomfortable people will get. And you don't have to do that if that's not your personality, or where you feel like, you have the biggest gifts in terms of moving this conversation forward. I mean, I totally get that. But if you do have that inside of you, I would suggest that as another potential place to start. Because what often happens in my experience is people think they're against this, but then become very uncomfortable at actually coming out against it because of some of the messages they've internalized, where they might look at Jeffrey and say, well, he is trying to help people. And and then you can have the conversation of, well, yeah, he might be intending to help people, but he's actually really hurting people. So you don't need to come out against Jeffrey as a person, but this message is a problem, et cetera, et cetera. And if that moves you, we have a really special discussion guide that members of my film team really made. I cannot take credit for it. That is on our website. That can be a really wonderful place to start in terms of thinking about how to have these discussions within religious communities, closed door discussions. You could do a viewing of the film and then have a discussion. Again, a private conversation with one person at an organization. It can do a lot. But asking the direct question, I think that's a way that's a way we need to move this conversation forward, not just like vaguely have people say in church communities they think they're against this, but actually come out against it. I think that's a really important next step, and I really hope that happens a lot more, and that I hope the film can be a part of that.
One thing I was really kind of inspired by in the film was, I mean, this is kind of like the opposite, but like the prayer rally that pushed forward I was just thinking about the amount of churches, like the weight that they can hold, and like that they can use it for either, right? Like they can use
Absolutely.
And so like, interestingly enough, I was actually inspired by that, because I do know so many pastors and church people that are absolutely against conversion therapy, and do think that our siblings in the LGBTQ community should participate in the full life of the church. And just like, if we could gather together, like, our voices could be just as loud. And so my mind was like, how do we do that thing? The opposite of that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of organizations too that are doing that work. Like what I'm suggesting, it's not like I'm the first person to think of doing, this at all. Or there's a lot of organizations like UCF. I mean, there's like a bunch of them. They're on our website if you don't know them off the top of your head, but I suspect a lot of you all know them as well. But absolutely. And to me, the conversation about what do we do next all comes back to remembering that you have the power to start something. And that can, all the forms that can be in the form that Julie mentioned, one of the forms that Julie mentioned, and the form that I mentioned, and things neither of us have mentioned, but just realizing that you have the power to make a little bit of change. I think that's really step one.
I know we're getting to the end of our time, but I do see one more question. So Mo or Aloha, do you want to ask a question?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess have a question for Julie. The movie was amazing, you guys, but it was like, it hit home. Obviously, there's so many of us that it's like our story too. It feels like we had to stop and pause and kind of come back the next day and like, okay, like let's, it's heavy. We both grew up in church as well, and have very similar stories. And I think coming into like early 30s, late 20s, we're starting to say like, why do I see so many relationships in the queer community struggle? And I feel like, when you talk about your mom, like that's the parental role that's absent there is for me, I've always felt like it's hard for us as a community to have functioning relationships and loving one another, because we were told that we're not either worthy of love or we can't have a family. You're not worthy of having a family. And so my question to you is, at your journey right now, what is your advice to somebody in the community who's, younger than you, that's maybe going through these things? And what is your advice as to giving them like, I guess, your way of letting them know, like, there is hope. Like, you don't have to be this person. You don't have to let your past influence your future. And I guess, what's your advice, on managing, relationships and going further and wanting to have a healthy family dynamic, in the future? I don't know
That's
if
such a great question. Oh my gosh. It's great to meet y'all. I'm so glad you're here and asking questions like that. And I think, there's so much I'm still figuring out myself. I would say that the things that have helped me the most are therapy, and, if you can't afford it, finding therapists who will use a sliding scale, maybe. Also just like reading a lot about like whether I'll get into like attachment theory or, Bowen's family systems, and just like learning about how the things we grew up with affect us in ways that we might see and not see. And then being gentle with yourselves and each other, I think, is just so important. And I think one thing that's so beautiful about the queer community is that, we're imperfect, like we're flawed just like everybody else. And we hurt each other. And at the same time, I find that there's so much grace and so much kindness and compassion, because there's this sense of like, we have been through so much trauma, and we know what it's like to go to experience like loss and rejection and so much suffering. And so like, we don't want to contribute to more of that for each other. We want to be a part of healing and uplifting. And there's a real, I think, norm in at least all the queer community I know, and the close like lesbian relationships in my life, where there's just a lot of grace and a lot of understanding and a lot of gentleness. So find more people like that who are like even better than you are, and softer and strong, and like let them in and let them love you and learn from that love. And I think we'll all continue to grow in kindness and grace.
All right, I know we're out of time. The question that we love to ask everybody though, and I'd love for you both just to take a minute or so and answer, but Kristine and Julie, what is your hope for the future of the church?
Kristine, you want to start?
Ooh, I'm thinking.
I think like my hope is that people will listen better and not just hear what the sound of their own voice, but that they'll actually listen to the people talking to them, whatever issues they're talking about, that they'll be humble and acknowledge mistakes and quick to like eager to grow and eager to change and evolve when met with new information.
I think we have to end on that. I totally agree. I was thinking listening. I think that's what came to mind as well. Just that that people really learn to listen and listen deeply. So yeah, I underscore everything Julie just said. I think that was beautifully said.
Well, thank you both. And again, thank you for sharing your lives, your work. There were listening ears for sure. And so thank you for helping us practice to listen. We appreciate you. We're continuing to cheer you on and be in your corner and follow whatever is next for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It truly means the world. Thank you, each of you.
Yes, this was so lovely. Thank you all so much for hosting this. It's amazing.
Just as a reminder, February's virtual book club will feature A More Perfect Union, a new vision for building the beloved community by Adam Russell Taylor, president of Sojourners. Our virtual Q&A with Adam will be on Thursday, February 24th at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Please email info@thecollectivetable.org for more information or to register.